If This Goes On, Don't Panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Regular listeners will know, but for those that have missed it, Diane and I, Alan, have an ongoing discussion about her love of military science fiction and my lack of enthusiasm for it. So Diane has decided to do a column on why she loves it. I love this idea for 3 reasons. 1, military science fiction is commonly thought of as conservative, which clearly this podcast is not. 2, the idea in its entirety is daring and creative. And number 3, this column will cover the very important topic of mental health as well as military science fiction. And if you've been following the podcast avidly, you know this is something that has weighed very heavily on our minds in this last year. So why is discussing military SF daring, you are wondering? Well, this is not going to be a regular discussion about the subgenre, though that is part of it, but it will also be a very personal essay. In fact, at first, I tried to talk Diane out of parts of this, but being the warrior she is, she wanted to move forward with it anyway. This idea is creative in that we are combining formats. The majority of the episode will be a personal essay monologued by Diane, like most of our columns, but we will intersperse small pieces of interview throughout the episode. We'll try to keep it on the shorter side, I promise. So, without further ado, here is our most daring column yet, Why I Love Military Science Fiction by Diane Morrison. Diane Morrison is a blue-collar, neurodiverse, queer author of short and long speculative fiction and pagan nonfiction. She is a person of contradictions, an intellectual without a college degree, a fighter who hates bullies, a progressive activist who is pro-military and anti-war. They have been a taxi dispatcher, a care aide, a housekeeper, a thief, a mother, a busker, and a rock singer, and they still do folk music from time to time. Her work has appeared with Third Flatiron Press, Cosmas, Infinities, and the lunar punk anthology Bioluminescent. But so far, the highlight of her writing career has been being longlisted for a Hugo for her work on the fan cast If This Goes On, Don't Panic. They teach a class at the Rambo Academy for Wayward Writers on finding time to write, and the second and third novels in their Toy Soldier Saga series are scheduled to come out later this year. They live in BC, Canada, with their husband and their partner, and their greatest joy is their 3 grandchildren. She is fighting PTSD one day at a time.
Where do I start? I guess every writer asks themselves that question when they begin. Do I tell the story chronologically, allowing you to follow the travails of time? Or do I start it in media res to bring you into the story right away? I've never been good at writing my own story, even as a small child. 1981, first grade, we were supposed to keep a daily journal as a writing exercise. I never did. I wrote stories, poetry, little songs, anything to avoid talking about my own life. I guess I told a pretty lie. My teachers were very taken with my writing. I got special music training and the right to be in the school play with the intermediate kids because of my songwriting. The journaling continued through our primary grades, and my grade 3 teacher compiled all my poetry in a special notebook, which she copied by hand and gave to me at the end of the year. I still have that notebook filled with poetry. I never did actually keep a journal. Speculative fiction is often dismissed by literary critics as escapist. But the great J.R.R. Tolkien had little respect for that opinion, as the indomitable Ursula Le Guin paraphrased when she said, Fantasy is escapist, and that is its glory. If a soldier is imprisoned by the enemy, don't we consider it his duty to escape? If we value the freedom of the mind and soul, if we're partisans of liberty, then it's our plain duty to escape and to take as many people with us as we can. I couldn't agree more. You probably know my voice by now if you listen to this podcast. Maybe it's even comforting and familiar. We've been doing this for long enough, I think. But you don't know me. Well, okay, that's not true. Some of you are my friends IRL, and you know me, now. But most people don't know me, not really. I play roles. I like it that way. I'm beginning to think I've done it all my life. It didn't take me long as a child to figure out that I was weird. Maybe it was the long looks I got from other kids at school. Maybe it was the fact that I grokked things that the other kids didn't. World War I, Watership Down, The Terminator. I was good at reading and bad at sports. Naturally, I was bullied a lot. I spent a lot of time by myself reading. I don't remember a time I didn't write. Nothing bored me more than the banal simplicity of see spot run. When it became clear my running amok during reading time came from a lack of interest, not a lack of ability, I had to do a test. They tried to move me up to the 3rd grade, and when my parents said no, my school librarian gave me access to the intermediate books instead. Before long, I was voting in the Children's Choice Awards. I did not properly appreciate our librarian, Mr. Walters. The kids thought he was a weirdo, too. He seemed to have 5 copies of the same shirt and slacks, with only his tie changing by the day. He had bowl-cut, steel-gray hair, Coke bottle glasses, and a square, sour-looking face. The overall impression was that of a frog. He used to bounce on his toes when he was lecturing. He also taught history. I always liked other weirdos. I spent a lot of time in his company, just chatting, because of course I volunteered for library monitor right away. Why wouldn't I? More time to read, and I didn't want to go out into the prison yard. I'm sorry, the schoolyard anyway. Mr. Walters introduced me to whodunits, children's classics, and Greek mythology. I read the Iliad and the Odyssey before I was 8. But my favorite was the fantastic, the stuff we call speculative fiction now. Give me a spaceship or a dragon, and I was hooked. I remember reading some amazing speculative fiction books for children. The Turning Place, The Dark is Rising sequence, The Wizard of Earthsea, the Harper Hall trilogy, Keeper of the Isis Light and Guardian of Isis, The Giver, the entire Oz series, Interstellar Pig, The House of Stairs, The Green Futures of Tycho, Scion, The Girl with the Silver Eyes, The Blue Sword, and The Hero in the Crown. But my favorites? I loved Citizen of the Galaxy and Starship Troopers, Ender's Game, the Vorkosigan Saga, Dune. Space opera was my thing. I love stories with stars flowing past the portholes like wine. But I especially liked the stories of adventure and danger, with capable heroes, young or old. I liked their fighting spirit. Don't get me wrong. All of those books I mentioned, they're all great. You might notice that only one is sheer fun. The rest of them are about young people in pain, something I knew about.
During your monologue, you mentioned that you were a weird kid, right?
Yes.
I was also a weird kid, right? What did being the weird kid mean for you?
Well, I was bullied a lot. That was a big thing, and I think that's contributed to my overall issues with trauma now, right? In a way, though, it was also a bit liberating because I just, it didn't seem to matter what I did. I was still going to be at the end of the social, I don't know, the outcast, as it were, right? So I kind of did my own thing. And so I developed a lot of independent thought, I think, as a result. I was always interested in science fiction. I was always interested in the things that went with that, like space and, like I said, give me a dragon or a spaceship and I'm a happy girl, right? So, I read a lot. I spent a lot of time in nature. I learned to alter my spoken vocabulary because I would use these big words that I would read and people would think I was putting on airs. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. See, okay. You identify with that. Yeah, exactly. Right. Academics weren't a big challenge for me. I was considered one of the quote unquote smart kids or whatever, right? Which did not help because I was completely uncoordinated and was kind of useless when it came to team sports. So, it was very stereotypical nerd before nerd was cool, That's what it looked like for me, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can completely relate to all of that. Why do you think weird kids like us gravitate towards science fiction and fantasy and horror? The speculative fiction, if you will. Why are all the nerds reading romance novels?
I wonder if it's because we want things to be different. And speculative fiction imagines worlds that are different. We realize we don't fit in the world as it is. So we like to imagine worlds in which we might fit because it's not the same world,
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe that was a large part of it for me. That and there's always a theme, I guess, because a lot of nerds end up writing speculative fiction. Nerds are often the heroes, right? And we all want to imagine ourselves as the heroes. And we end up spending a lot of time alone. So we read a lot. And because we have nothing else to do to educate and, engage our young minds. And so we end up reading about things that other kids our age maybe don't. And those things are also talked about in speculative fiction, science being obviously the big theme in science fiction. And we think about, what that could mean because we're interested in the subject and the technology. And I suppose there's also the whole special interest neurodiverse thing, right? If we find something we hyper focus on, then we read about it, and we read about it in fiction as well as in nonfiction. So maybe so. Genre fiction tends to get snubbed by the intellectual crowd who fancy themselves the arbiters of literature. This bothers me. Why is it not evident that literary fiction is just another genre? It has conventions, patterns, things the readers expect. Usually it's all about the quality of the prose, which I can and do appreciate. But do they really think this somehow makes it better? The emperor, I think, has no clothes. Worse yet, literary writers often get widely praised for their originality when all they're doing is recycling an ancient, well-worn sci-fi plot. I loved the Matt Adams series, but all Atwood did there was a modern take on the drowned world and the island of Dr. Moreau. McCarthy's The Road is just another post-apocalyptic, grimdark meditation. All these literary critics accomplish by their effuse praise for originality is to reveal their ignorance. Likewise, I don't know why military space opera is often snubbed in science fiction. This seems counterproductive to me. Military space opera is the banner carrier of the genre. When people think of sci-fi, they think of Halo. Perhaps that's the reason. Maybe science fiction writers just get so tired of explaining there are no space marines in their books that they just want nothing to do with stories of space marines. I don't know why they seem to have the idea that their stories are better if they don't, though. Maybe it's because, inasmuch as speculative fiction has alumni, those alumni happen to know little about war. They also tend to be of middle class or higher, so collectively they know less of fear, too. Not real fear, not the kind of fear in which you know in your bones that if you don't do the right thing in the next few seconds, you are going to die. But I know. Or maybe the alumni just don't like war. I can't blame them. I hate war too. I hate suffering and cruelty. I hate the cult of death. I think they think if no one chose to go to war, all the suffering would stop. So they have no time for soldiers who go willingly to the slaughter to put their bodies and souls in harm's way. They don't know what that's like. But I do. People are savage creatures. We can be creatures of light, too, but there's a part of human nature that believes in drawing blood, tearing flesh. Choosing not to fight when those people come to call is choosing to accept oppression and pain. So I say kudos to rough men and women and NBs standing guard in the night. I want to hear their stories. Maybe in their courage, I will find my own.
What does a Space Marine character bring to a story that other character types don't?
Okay, a Space Marine is a person who has signed up to put themselves in harm's way. Mm-hmm. Now, often, not that I don't like reluctant heroes, I do. I think that they're lots of fun. But a Marine knew what they were getting into, right? They, to some extent, went, yeah, okay, there's something I believe in, be that protecting my family, be that a cause that is bigger than myself, be that a sense of duty, whatever it is that drives them to put themselves in harm's way. That is a character with amazing agency. And I think that this is underutilized a lot. And this is on both ends, not just, I'm not talking about just the attitude towards military sci-fi that a lot of the science fiction world seems to have, which is that, oh yeah, this is, pulp, I guess, right? But also, there's a lot of military science fiction writers who treat it like that, right? They're looking for, characters who just handle things. And that's, but the potential for that character, someone who is human, or, human-like, if you're not writing about humans, exactly, who gets into this, does it because there's something that they believe they have to defend by putting themselves in harm's way. That's interesting. Most people don't want to put themselves in harm's way.
No.
Most of us would rather keep our heads down. So what is it that drives that person to do that? Why do they do that? That makes them interesting. I'm with the alumni on one thing, though. I can't stand military sci-fi with characters who remain unaffected. You can't go through something like that and not be forever changed. It sets you apart from almost everyone around you. 1,000 unintentional hurts as people speak blithely about things they can't understand or shut down discussion about things you need to talk about. If they don't know about that awful moment, people don't know the most essential thing about you. They'll never understand who you are. And you quickly become aware that just by trying to share this essential part of you, you can hurt other people. Your life causes other people pain. It's death by paper cuts. But characters in a good military space opera, they know. You can always tell the writers who know and the ones who don't, and you can always tell when the ones who don't know are trying. There's a bunch of military sci-fi out there that's nothing more than pseudo-fascist jerk-off fantasy. Fuck that shit. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about brave, honorable characters in a uniform who suffer, but do it anyway, because it has to be done, and because if not them, then who? Sometimes the military a sci-fi soldier serves is worthy of that trooper's service. Sometimes it isn't. Most of them will ask some hard duty of the protagonist, something that makes you feel like worms are crawling in your belly, and our soldier will have to make a choice. Or maybe they have no choice, and they're used, broken, and then tossed aside. How our soldier reacts says a lot about who they are, but there's never a good choice, just lesser degrees of evil. War is ugly that way. Our soldier makes their choice and then decides if they can live with that choice. And sometimes they can't. Or there's a dark night of the soul in which they struggle desperately to come to terms with it. The best stories usually have that moment. I approve of that. That's real. I need to see characters who face this struggle. It gives me context for some of the choices I made. Maybe I'll be able to work through some of my survivor's guilt with my therapist that way.
Can you tell us some of your favorite military science fiction writers?
Yeah, okay. So hands down, my favorite is Lois McMaster-Bujold.
Right.
She was definitely a formative voice for me. I like her characters. They do other things besides fight. And the reasons why they fight are all the reasons I mentioned. Duty. They believe in something bigger than themselves. They want to protect their families. You know, they have relationships. Those relationships are important. She's not afraid to break it up with comic relief. Right? She's written some amazingly funny stuff. Yeah. I love her to death. And she thinks about the ethics of war. Others that I really like, I like David Weber. Okay. And I realize that probably sounds like a surprising thing coming from someone who is clearly on the progressive side of the political spectrum, because David Weber is generally thought of as one of the more conservative writers. He writes for Baen, and Baen is thought of as being a haven for conservative writers, right? But no, dude, he was writing with Eric Flint. Now, he's a bit of a capitalist, but he also sees the negative sides of capitalism and includes that in the writing that he does. There's a character who is a particular problem because he is a businessman that the military must deal with in order to get certain, technology that they are paying for to fund the war that they have found themselves in. Right. Mm-hmm. But, he's kind of an ass. Right. And then he has a change of heart. Right? Because he's put in a bad situation where he realizes, and he's still kind of an ass later on, but he's less of an ass, So yeah. Stuff like that. And then there's that whole series of novels that David Weber and Eric Flint co-wrote about, basically there's a slave culture, and it's about them and their liberation and the issues of capitalism that lead towards the economics of slavery. It's there, guys. Like, don't be painting him with the same brush, right? Don't be painting him with that conservative brush, because that's not how he thinks at all. At least not if you're reading between the lines there.
And I want to add that Eric Flint is a well-known socialist, right?
Absolutely, right? Was a labor organizer,
Yep. And David Weber also writes with Jane Linkskold sometimes, who is also not conservative.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, go read those books, guys. They're amazing. They're amazing books. The ones that they co-wrote are perhaps better than the ones that David Weber writes on his own. I say reluctantly, because I love his series. I love Honor Harrington as a character. She's wonderful. I want to be her when I grow up. And I also would like to put in a defense of Robert Heinlein.
Uh-oh. Here we go. Okay, bring it.
Okay. You're right. The Robert Heinlein leans on the probably centrist right level of things when we take the current political venue, right? But I think a lot of the stuff that he's written is misinterpreted. Spider Robinson wrote an amazing essay on this, right? You should go read it. But basically, it's like the women in his books are always beautiful. Why? Because they're confident and they know who they are and they go after what they want. And that's why they're beautiful. Right? If you read the descriptions of them, most of them aren't supermodels. Some of them have long noses. Some of them have freckles, which wasn't considered to be, remember he's writing in the 60s, right? Freckles was not considered a beauty mark at that time, right? They're beautiful because they are themselves realized. Now, granted, I think that he leaned a little bit too much into the whole chalice and blade idea of women and men being separate but different. I don't agree with that, never have, but I get where it was coming from at the time. And at the time, that was feminism. So going to point that out too. The thing is that Starship Troopers is often interpreted as a fascist fantasy. It is anything but. What is going on in Starship Troopers is that Heinlein is exploring the idea that, are you really invested in something if you are not willing to put yourself in harm's way to protect it? If you're just willing to go along to get along, right? Are you really invested in the situation enough to be able to make some kind of a political judgment on that? And I mean, we talk about low information voters, right? Heinlein saw the same problem, and he was speculating over if you had to fight for it. And it's not even, that's another thing. Everybody's required in Starship Troopers to join the government service if they want to vote. That doesn't mean join the military. A lot of people just assume that. I assume because they didn't read the book or they didn't read it thoroughly, but that's not what he's saying, right? He's saying service, and that service could be pushing paper in an office, you know? That service could be picking up garbage. Just, do you have to serve the thing that you're going to express an opinion on in a vote? It's a good question.
Okay, that is all for us today. If you like what we're doing, share us with your friends, and we'll see you again next time.